Abigail Turner didn't cry when the whole town laughed at her. She cried in the kitchen at 4 in the morning, pressing her hands flat against the counter, staring at a pie she had baked for a man who would never ask for it. A man who smiled at her that Tuesday and said the cruelest kind thing she had ever heard. Not with anger, not with disgust, but with a soft, tired laugh that made it so much worse. Because he meant it as a compliment. And she felt it like a door closing. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story all the way through, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The summer of 1883 came down hard on Durango, Colorado. Not the kind of hard that broke fences or dried up wells, though it did both of those things too. It was the kind of hard that settled into a person's bones by mid-morning and stayed there until long after the sun quit. The kind of summer that made people short with each other, quick to judge and slow to forgive. The kind that had been going on for so long that most folks in town had stopped noticing how mean they'd gotten. Abigail Turner noticed. She had always noticed things other people didn't bother to. She noticed, for instance, that the widow Calloway at the south end of Main Street hadn't opened her curtains in 3 days. She noticed that the Delaney boy had started walking slower on his way to school, the way children do when something at home has gone wrong. She noticed which merchants smiled at their customers and which ones smiled only at their wallets. And she noticed every single Tuesday morning without fail that Samuel Cole's porch light was already on before the sun finished rising. She had been noticing that for 3 years. She had been baking for 3 years. Abigail Turner was 25 years old, and she ran her family's ranch south of town by herself after her father passed and her 2 brothers left for California without looking back. She was not small. She had never been small. Her body was built wide and strong, the kind of build that made men in town look away, or look too long, neither of which felt like anything good. She had dark hair she kept pinned up tight, because loose hair was a luxury she couldn't afford on a working ranch. Her hands were calloused. Her boots were worn through at the left heel, because she always led with the same foot going uphill. She was not what Durango considered beautiful. Durango had a very specific idea of beautiful, and it involved being narrow in places. Abigail was not narrow, and soft in places. Abigail had made herself hard out of necessity. She had learned early to walk like she didn't hear them. She had learned to keep her chin level and her pace steady and her expression fixed somewhere between dignified and indifferent, even when the comments followed her down the street like dust behind a wagon. Even when she heard Martha Holt tell her daughter, not quietly enough, that some women just aren't built for being chosen. Even then, Abigail walked straight. But on Tuesday mornings, walking across the field to Samuel Cole's ranch, she let herself walk differently. Slower. Like the walk itself was something she didn't want to rush. She didn't examine that too closely. Samuel Cole was 55 years old and had lived alone for 3 years. Which meant he and Abigail had both been counting the same stretch of time just from different sides of it. His wife Eleanor had died of fever in the spring of 1880. They'd been married 26 years. She had been the one who kept the house warm in the way that had nothing to do with firewood. After she died, Samuel kept the ranch running the way a man keeps a clock wound out of habit, not because he expects anything good to come of it, but because stopping feels worse than going. He was not a man who talked much. He had never been. Eleanor used to say that Samuel Cole could communicate an entire opinion with a single adjustment of his hat brim, and she hadn't been wrong. He was lean and weathered in the way that men who work land go lean and weathered, and he had gray at his temples and in his beard and lines around his eyes that deepened when he was thinking harder than he let on, which was almost always. He was not what Durango considered eligible. Too old, they said. Too set. Too much history attached to him like a shadow that never shifted. He had a grown son, Daniel, who lived in Denver and wrote letters twice a year. He had a dog named Hector, who was half blind and slept on the porch. He had 400 acres that he worked with 2 hired hands and sheer stubbornness. And every Tuesday morning, he had Abigail Turner crossing his field with a pie wrapped in cloth, and he had never once asked her to stop. He told himself it was because turning away a good pie was foolish. He didn't examine that too closely either. The Tuesday. It all changed, started the same as every other Tuesday. Abigail was up before 4. She had the crust made before the heat started climbing, which was the only sensible way to bake in a Colorado summer. She worked in her kitchen with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing something so many times that your hands know the steps before your mind does. Peaches. She'd gotten them from the Garza farm 2 days ago, ripe enough to smell through the cloth she'd wrapped them in. She sliced them clean, and even the way her mother had shown her, and she did not think about Samuel Cole's smile, or the way the skin around his eyes went soft when he was pleased about something. She did not think about those things. She wrapped the pie. She put on her good boots, not because it was a special occasion, but because the walk across the field was long enough to justify the better pair. She pulled her hair back. She checked the latch on the chicken coop. She did all the ordinary things a woman does on an ordinary morning. And then she walked. The field between her property and Samuel's was about a quarter mile of open grass, not yet scorched down to yellow by the full height of the summer. She walked it the way she always did, steady, not hurrying, letting the morning settle around her. A hawk turned slow circles overhead. The grass made a sound like paper in the breeze. Samuel was on the porch. He was always on the porch by the time she arrived. She had wondered more than once whether he watched for her from inside first, then came out to look like he'd been there all along. She had never asked. "Morning," he said the way he always said it, low, unhurried, like the word itself had nowhere important to be. "Morning, Mr. Cole." She climbed the 2 steps and held out the pie. "Peach this week. Garza's had a good crop." He took it from her with both hands the way he always did, and lifted the cloth at the corner, and breathed in slow, the way a man does when he's genuinely grateful, but doesn't know quite how to say it without it sounding like more than he means. "That's a fine smell," he said. "It's a fine fruit." He nodded. Set the pie down on the rail beside him. Hector lifted his head from the porch floor, decided the pie was not for him, and lowered it again. Abigail should have said goodbye then. She always said goodbye around this point. The ritual was established, pie-delivered pleasantries exchanged back across the field before the heat fully arrived. That was the arrangement, even though no arrangement had ever been spoken aloud. But Samuel was looking at the pie with an expression she couldn't quite read, something quieter than his usual quiet. "Abigail," he said. She stopped. He looked up at her then. Not the polite sidelong look he gave most people. A direct look. The kind he used when he was about to say something he'd been sitting on for a while. "You've been bringing me these pies for 3 years," he said. "I have," she said carefully. "Every Tuesday." Every Tuesday. He was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the field, then back at her, and something moved across his face that she couldn't name. Something that looked almost like sorrow, except softer than that. "If I were 20 years younger," he said, and his voice had a rough kind of warmth in it, the kind that thought it was being kind, "I might have had a real chance with you." The air went out of the morning. Abigail stood there on Samuel Cole's porch with her hands loose at her sides, and the hawk still turning lazy circles overhead, and old Hector breathing slow on the floorboards, and she felt something inside her chest fold up small and tight, the way a piece of paper folds when you press it too hard. He was smiling. He thought he had given her something. He thought it was a compliment, the most honest one he was capable of, said with the genuine, uncomplicated warmth of a man who doesn't realize that what he's just offered is a door, and that the door is already closed, and that he is the one who closed it. She looked at him for a long moment. And then Abigail Turner, who had spent 25 years being measured and found insufficient, who had learned to walk straight and keep her chin level and her expression fixed. Abigail Turner stopped being quiet. "Is that what you think?" she said. Her voice came out steady. She was a little surprised by that. Samuel blinked. He hadn't expected that. Most people didn't push back when he spoke. He wasn't a man people pushed back on. "I meant it kindly," he said. "I know you did," she said. "That's what makes it hard to hear." He was very still now. The easy warmth had left his expression, replaced by something more careful. "What do you mean?" he said. "You just told me," she said, "that the thing standing between us is arithmetic. Your age. Like you ran the numbers and came up short, and that's the end of it. Like it was a land survey and not a person standing in front of you." "Abigail, I'm not angry," she said, and she wasn't quite. There was something under the steadiness that ached, but she pressed past it. "I just want you to hear what you actually said. You said if the numbers were different, you'd want me, which means the wanting is already there. And you're the one who decided to let a number close the door." Samuel looked at her for a long time. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not agreement, not yet, but the start of something uncomfortable that a thinking man can't just put back down once it's been lifted. "I'm 55 years old," he said. "I know how old you are." "You're 25. I know how old I am too." People would talk. "People already talk," she said. "They've been talking about me since I was old enough for them to have opinions about my body. Talking didn't stop me from crossing this field every Tuesday. And it won't." She stepped back then. 2 steps back to the ground, and she picked up the hem of her skirt out of the dust in that practical, unsentimental way she did everything. "The pie's peach," she said. "It needs to be eaten today or tomorrow, not later. It won't hold in this heat." And she walked back across the field. She walked straight, chin level, pace steady. She did not look back. She didn't know that Samuel Cole stood on that porch and watched her the entire way across the field. She didn't know that when she disappeared over the low rise between their properties, he sat down in his chair, slowly the way a man sits when something has knocked the air out of him, and he picked up the pie and held it on his lap and did not eat it. He just held it and thought about arithmetic. He thought about the 26 years he'd had with Eleanor, and how quickly they'd gone, and how if he had 20 more years left on this earth, which was generous, and if Abigail had 50, then he was asking her to do her math with a number that would run out before hers did. That seemed unfair. It seemed deeply specifically unfair. He had called it kindness, closing the door before she had a chance to make a choice that would cost her. He turned that thought over carefully. And then, for the first time, he let himself wonder whether it was actually kindness, or whether it was fear dressed up in the language of consideration. He sat with that for a long time. Back in town, the conversations about Abigail Turner were having a busy summer. Ethan Marsh, 28 years old. His father owned the mill, a future as solid and unexciting as a plowed field had been paying Abigail attention since April. He was the kind of man Durango approved of, established, respectable, the right age, the right family. He had sent flowers twice, which she'd acknowledged politely and not encouraged. He had shown up at her fence line twice, which she'd acknowledged politely and not encouraged either. He told his mother he was confident she'd come around. His mother told half the town. The town collectively decided Abigail was being foolish by not immediately and gratefully accepting what was clearly the best offer she was going to get. Martha Holt said so directly, the way Martha Holt said everything in the dry goods store in front of whoever happened to be purchasing flour. She'd do well to stop making those weekly trips to Cole's ranch, Martha said, arranging bolts of cloth with the efficiency of a woman who had managed everyone else's life for 60 years. Carrying pies to a widower twice her age. It's peculiar. People are starting to wonder. The woman buying flour, young Mrs. Delaney, nodded carefully, the way you nod when you don't want to agree but don't want to disagree either. Abigail's always been independent, Mrs. Delaney offered. Independent, Martha repeated in the tone that made the word sound like a diagnosis. Well, independent won't keep her company when she's old and alone. Ethan Marsh is a good man from a good family. She's not. Martha paused, diplomatic, for approximately half a second. She's not in a position to be particular. Mrs. Delaney said nothing. Martha Holt had been saying variations of this about Abigail Turner for years. She's not in a position to be particular, as if Abigail's body were a kind of debt she owed, as if she should be grateful for whatever was offered, because the town had already calculated what she was worth and handed her the total. Word of it got back to Abigail, the way word always got back in a town the size of Durango. Not directly. Through a kind look from Mrs. Garza at the farm, through the way the Delaney boy's mother patted her arm a little too long when she saw her in town. Through the particular quality of the silence when she walked into the general store. Abigail heard all of it. She carried a pie back across the field the following Tuesday, just the same. What happened next Tuesday was different. Samuel was on the porch, but he was standing this time. Not sitting, not leaning, standing. And when she came up the steps, he didn't wait for her to extend the pie. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked at him. "What I said last week," he said. "I've been thinking about it, and I think—" He stopped. He pressed his jaw together the way he did when the words weren't cooperating. "I think I said it like I was doing you a favor. And I wasn't. I was doing myself one." Abigail was quiet. "I'm not sure what to do with that yet," he said. "But I didn't want to let another Tuesday go by without saying it." She stood there for a moment holding the pineapple this week because she'd thought he could use something more familiar, less soft. And she looked at this man who was 55 years old and standing on his porch, looking at her like she was a problem he was determined to solve honestly. "You're terrible at apologies," she said. "I know it," he said. That was a start, though. "Yes, ma'am." She handed him the pie. He took it with both hands, and when she turned to go, he said, "Abigail." She stopped. "I'd be grateful," he said slowly, like each word cost something, "if you came back next Tuesday." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I was going to anyway," she said. "I've got nowhere else to be on Tuesday mornings." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough truth for a Tuesday in summer. She walked back across the field, and this time the hawk was gone, and the sky was very blue, and Abigail Turner let herself feel for exactly the length of that walk, and no longer something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Like maybe the door wasn't as closed as she'd been told. The following Tuesday came and went, the same as the ones before it. Abigail across the field, pie in hand, Samuel on the porch, Hector on the floor, except that it wasn't the same at all, and both of them knew it. Something had shifted in the air between them. Not dramatically. Not the way things shift in stories where someone makes a grand declaration and violins swell somewhere in the background. It was quieter than that. The kind of shift you feel in your chest before you can name it. The kind that makes you more careful with your words, not because you're afraid, but because you've suddenly become aware that the words matter more than they used to. Samuel took the apple pie she brought and said it was his favorite, which was not something he'd mentioned in 3 years of Tuesdays, and she filed that away without comment. She asked him whether Hector's eye had gotten any worse. He said the vet thought not. She said that was good. He said it was. And then they stood there in a silence that had a different quality to it than all the silences before. Less like two people running out of things to say, and more like two people choosing deliberately to stand still for a moment before whatever came next. She left after 20 minutes. He watched her go. When she crested the low rise and disappeared, he went inside and put the pie on the kitchen table and sat down across from it and thought not for the first time since the previous Tuesday about what she'd said. The wanting is already there. You're the one who decided to let a number close the door. He thought about that for a long time. He thought about it Wednesday and Thursday too. By Friday he had repaired the section of fence on the east boundary of his property that he'd been telling himself for 2 months he would get to eventually. He was not a man who examined his own motivations too closely, but even he understood that the fence happened to run along the edge of Abigail Turner's land, and that he'd spent the better part of the afternoon doing work that kept him in clear sight of her barn. He didn't see her. He told himself that was fine. It wasn't entirely fine. The following Monday, Ethan Marsh rode up Abigail's drive. She was in the yard when he came mending a section of post and rail that one of the horses had gotten into. Her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and her hair coming loose from its pins, the way it always did by midday. She heard the horse before she saw the rider, and when she looked up and recognized the Marsh boy, she felt something that wasn't quite dread and wasn't quite annoyance. something in between the feeling of an obligation arriving early. "Miss Turner," Ethan said, pulling up and tipping his hat with the practiced ease of a man who had been told from boyhood that he was the kind of man women wanted to see coming. He was handsome enough. Tall, clean-shaven, with the particular confidence that comes not from having been tested, but from never having had reason to doubt. "You're working hard on a Monday." "Ranch doesn't take Mondays off," she said. He smiled. "No, I suppose it doesn't." He swung down from his horse without being invited, which was the kind of thing Ethan Marsh did not out of rudeness exactly, just out of a deeply held assumption that his presence was always welcome. "I wanted to ask you something if you have a moment." She had a fence post to finish, but she set the mallet down. "Go ahead." "The harvest social," he said. "It's 3 weeks out. I'd like to escort you if you're willing." She looked at him. He was smiling the way men smile when they expect yes. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Ethan." The smile held, but something behind it adjusted. "May I ask why not?" "I don't think we want the same things," she said. Plainly. Not unkindly, but plainly. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've been seen going over to Cole's ranch every week." "I have," she said. "People are talking Abigail." "People have always been talking. This is different," he said, and the ease dropped out of his voice, replaced by something more earnest, which almost made it worse. "He's 55 years old. He's got 1 foot." He stopped himself. Started again. "I'm just saying there's no future there." "And with you there is," she said. "I think so, yes." He said it seriously, not arrogant, genuinely certain, which meant he believed it, which meant he had never once considered the possibility that what he was offering might not be what she wanted. "Ethan," she said, "I appreciate that you mean well. I do. But you rode up here to tell me who I should stop seeing and who I should start seeing. And I need you to understand that's not something I'm going to let anyone do. Not you. Not this town." He held his hat in both hands, now his horse standing patient beside him. "I'm not trying to tell you what to do," he said. "I'm trying to help me." She finished it for him. "I know. Everyone who's ever told me to be smaller, be quieter, make different choices. They were all trying to help me. That's the word they used." She picked up the mallet. "I'll be at the harvest social if I feel like going. You're welcome to be there too." Ethan Marsh stood there for a moment longer. Then he nodded, once mounted his horse, and rode back down the drive. She drove the fence post in with 3 clean hits. She was angrier than she'd let herself sound, and the fence knew it. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that Mrs. Patricia Marsh, Ethan's mother, had watched the whole exchange from the road, having arrived in her buggy 30 seconds too late to be part of it. She turned around without stopping. And she went directly to Martha Holt. By evening, the story in Durango was that Abigail Turner had been rude to Ethan Marsh on her own property and was making a fool of herself over that old widower Cole. That was not what had happened, but that was the story. Abigail heard it the next morning at the general store. Third hand filtered through Mrs. Delaney's careful, apologetic retelling. She listened. She bought her flour and her coffee and her salt. She thanked Mrs. Delaney for telling her, and she walked out of the store with her chin exactly level. She went home. She baked, and on Tuesday morning she crossed the field. Samuel was not on the porch. That had never happened before. She stood at the foot of the steps for a moment, pie in hand, and felt something drop in her stomach that she didn't want to name. Then the door opened, and Samuel came out pulling his hat on, and the relief that moved through her was quick and embarrassing. "Sorry," he said. "Had a situation with one of the horses. Wouldn't let the farrier near him this morning, and we've been going back and forth since dawn." He looked tired. He also looked, she thought, like he'd shaved more carefully than usual, which was a detail she chose not to examine. "Which one?" "Brutus. Stubborn animal." "You named a horse Brutus, and you're surprised he has a bad attitude." He looked at her for a moment. Then something unlocked at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the start of one. "That is fair," he said. She handed him the pie. Plum this time because she'd had the plums and they needed using. "Abigail," he said. He wasn't looking at the pie. He was looking at her with the direct look again. "I heard what's being said in town." She stilled. "About Ethan Marsh," he said. "About you turning him down. Ethan Marsh is a grown man who can manage his own disappointment." "That's not—" He stopped. Tried again. "I don't want you taking fire from this town because of these Tuesday mornings." "I'm not taking fire," she said. "I'm just hearing opinions. I've been hearing opinions my whole life. I'm still standing." "I know you are." He said it quietly. Something in his voice that she hadn't heard before. Something that sounded, she thought, like it might be admiration, but was trying not to show it. "I just want you to know that if it would be easier if you wanted to stop—" "I don't want to stop," she said. He was very still. "I want to bring you a pie every Tuesday," she said. "And I want to stand here and talk to you for 20 minutes or an hour, whatever you have, and I want—" She stopped, steadied. "I want to keep doing what we've been doing, because whatever it is, it's the best part of my week. And I'm not giving it up because Martha Holt has opinions about my weight and my choices." The words sat there between them, honest and bare and slightly terrifying. Samuel looked at her for a long time. "Best part of my week, too," he said finally. It was the most he had offered, and it was enough. She nodded once, the way you nod when something important has been established and you don't want to overhandle it. He nodded back. Hector let out a long breath on the floorboards. She stayed an hour and a half. They talked about the horses and the summer and the price of grain and whether the Garzas would have a good crop through July, and Samuel told her about Eleanor's kitchen garden, which he'd let go to weeds the first year after she died and had only just gotten around to clearing again this past spring. Abigail told him about her father and how he used to sing badly while he worked, and how she still sometimes heard it in the mornings when she was out early enough. Neither of them said anything else about what had been established, but they both knew it had been. The week after that, Samuel rode into town on a Wednesday, not his usual supply day, and helped the Delaney family move a broken wagon off the South Road. Mrs. Delaney mentioned it to her husband, who mentioned it to the man at the livery, who mentioned it to 3 other people by the end of the day. None of this was connected in anyone's telling to Abigail Turner, but when Abigail heard it, she felt something warm move through her chest. She didn't say anything about it on Tuesday, neither did he, but she brought him a blackberry pie that week, which was his second favorite, and he said so, which meant he'd been keeping track. They were both keeping track of things they weren't saying out loud. And then the second twist came, the way the hard ones always do, not loud and sudden, but quiet, from a direction you weren't watching. Daniel Cole came home. Samuel's son arrived on a Thursday afternoon unannounced, the way he always arrived, with a letter that had probably crossed paths with him in transit, a carpet bag, and the particular energy of a man who has decided he is needed without checking first. He was 31 years old, broad like his father, but louder with Eleanor's eyes and Samuel's stubbornness, and none of the years of loss that had ground both those things down into something quieter and more deliberate. He was on the porch with Samuel when Abigail came over that Saturday, not a Tuesday, but Samuel had asked if she'd be willing to look at a problem with his kitchen door that had been sticking since April, and she had, because she was good with doors and because she wanted to. She came around the side of the house and heard the voices before she saw them, Samuel's low and measured, and another one younger, carrying the kind of cheerful authority that hadn't yet learned its limits. Just saying, there are women in Denver, pa good women your own age, women who— Daniel. I'm not trying to be unkind about it. I just think that you spending time with some young woman from the neighboring ranch that's enough. Samuel said it quietly, the way he said everything. But there was something underneath it that had edges, and Daniel heard those edges and stopped. Abigail stopped too. Around the corner of the house, out of sight, holding her toolbox and standing very still. She should have made noise. Should have announced herself. She knew that. She stood still for 3 more seconds. She comes over every Tuesday. Daniel said quieter now, more carefully. People in town are talking Pa. I heard it at the hotel last night before I even got out here. What people say is their business, Samuel said. What people say about you is my business. You're my father. Then act like it and trust my judgment. Silence. Have you even thought about this? Daniel said. Really thought about it. She's 25, Pa. She's got her whole life ahead of her. And I know what I am, Daniel. Still quiet. More edges now. I've been knowing it longer than you've been alive. Abigail heard Daniel exhale, heard the squeak of the porch chair. I just don't want you to get hurt, Daniel said. And this time the authority was gone, and it was just a son saying something true. I don't want either of you to get hurt. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Neither do I, he said. Abigail made herself move then. She went back around the way she'd come, gave it 30 seconds, and came around the other side, with her boots loud on the gravel, the way boots should be when a person is not trying to sneak up on anyone. Both men looked up when she came around the corner. Mr. Cole, she said. Sorry I'm a little late, had a situation with my East Gate. She looked at Daniel with the same calm level expression she had spent years perfecting. I don't believe we've met. Daniel stood. He had his father's manners at least, if not yet his father's wisdom. Daniel Cole, he said. Abigail Turner. She shook his hand. Your father's been kind enough to let me look at his kitchen door. It's been sticking. Daniel looked at his father. Samuel looked back at him with an expression that communicated in the way Samuel Cole communicated entire speeches with his face, that the conversation on the porch was over, and that the subject would not be revisited while Abigail was in the house. Nice to meet you, Daniel said after a pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Likewise, said Abigail. She went inside and fixed the door in 20 minutes. It had been the lower hinge, loose, slightly rusted. Nothing complicated. She left it swinging clean and easy on well-oiled metal. When she came back out, Daniel had gone inside and Samuel was leaning against the porch rail with his arms folded and his hat pushed back on his head, and an expression that she had learned to read as the one he wore when he was arranging what he wanted to say. I heard some of it, she said before he could speak. Not intentionally. He nodded. Not embarrassed, not defensive, just taking it in. He's not wrong about all of it, Samuel said. I know he's not, she said. He worries. He loves you, she said. That's not a thing to hold against him. Samuel looked at her for a moment with that direct look. You are, he said slowly. Like the sentence was being built as he went, a remarkably undefended person for someone the world has given so many reasons to be defended. She thought about that. I used up all my defense on the outside, she said finally. Didn't have any left for the parts that matter. He was quiet. Then, that's a hard way to live. It gets easier, she said. Some days. She picked up her toolbox. Tuesday, she said. Tuesday, he said. She walked home across the field, and she did not let herself replay the conversation on the porch. The one she'd half heard, the one where Samuel had said, "Neither do I," in response to his son's worry about someone getting hurt. She did not let herself hear the specific weight of that. I not, we not she, but I, as if his concern had become personal in a way that had not been true 3 weeks ago. She did not let herself think about that. She thought about it the entire way home. Back on the porch, Samuel Cole sat down in his chair and looked out at the field and breathed in slow and even. Hector shifted against his leg. Daniel came back outside after a while and sat on the steps with a cup of coffee and did not say anything for a long time. She fixed the door, Samuel said finally. I heard, said Daniel. Another silence. Pa, Daniel said. Don't. Daniel. Samuel looked at his son, and in his face was something that Daniel hadn't seen since before his mother died. Not happiness, not exactly, but the possibility of it, which was its own complicated thing. I know what I'm doing. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked out at the field in the direction Abigail had gone. "Does she?" he asked. Samuel looked out at the field too. "I think," he said slowly, "she might be the only one of us who does." Daniel drank his coffee. He didn't say anything else. He left on Saturday the way he'd come, with a carpet bag and more to think about than he'd had when he arrived. The following Tuesday, Samuel had repaired the section of Abigail's east fence that she'd mentioned being a problem. He hadn't told her he was going to do it. She noticed it. The morning before she came over, walked out to check the gate and found the whole section reset post-plumb rail, even done with the care of someone who knew what good work looked like. She stood there looking at it for a long time. She thought about numbers, about arithmetic, about a man who said "neither do I" when his son worried about someone getting hurt. About 26 years of marriage and 3 years of loss, and a man who wound a clock, not because he expected anything, but because stopping felt worse than going. She thought about all of it. Then she went inside and baked him a cherry pie. The most difficult one she made, the one with the lattice top that took an extra hour, and she carried it across the field the next morning with both hands, and she climbed his porch steps, and she handed it to him, and she said, "You fixed my fence." He took the pie. "It needed doing." "You didn't tell me." "Didn't need to." She looked at him. He looked back. And in the space of that look, something moved between them that was past the stage of being called nothing, that was well past the stage of Tuesday mornings and polite conversation, and two people being careful with each other in a field. It wasn't simple. It wasn't resolved. Durango was still talking, and Daniel had questions, and 30 years still sat between them, like a fact no amount of warmth could change. But Abigail Turner stood on Samuel Cole's porch on a Tuesday morning in the middle of a hard summer and looked at a man who had quietly, without asking for credit, fixed the thing on her land that she'd been too busy to fix herself, and she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Like maybe worth wasn't something that got decided by a town. Like maybe it got decided quietly by the people willing to do the work. The cherry pie had been the turning point, though neither of them would have called it that out loud. What followed was a change in the rhythm of things, subtle enough that someone watching from the outside might not have marked it, but felt by both of them, the way you feel a shift in weather before the sky shows it. Samuel started leaving the porch light on a little later in the mornings. Abigail started taking the longer route across the field, the one that added 4 minutes to the walk and passed closer to the fence line he had repaired. Small adjustments. The kind that happen when two people stop pretending they aren't paying attention to each other. The town, however, was paying attention in a different way entirely. Martha Holt had moved past the stage of quiet commentary and into the stage of organized concern, which in Durango meant she had recruited 2 other women, Barbara Crane, who ran the seamstress shop, and a woman named Vera Hutchins, who was new enough to town to still be trying to prove she belonged by agreeing with whoever seemed most certain about things. These 3 had taken to having their Tuesday morning coffee at the window table of the hotel dining room, which happened to overlook the road that ran along the edge of Samuel's property, which happened to be visible from the direction Abigail came. They were not subtle about it. Abigail knew they were watching. She walked the same as she always walked. But the Tuesday after she'd brought the cherry pie, something was different. When she came up Samuel's drive, there was a wagon she didn't recognize already. They're a good one with a matched pair of bays, and the kind of careful paintwork that said someone had money and wanted you to know it without being too obvious about it. She slowed without meaning to. Samuel came out of the barn before she reached the porch. He looked tired in a specific way. Not the tired of hard work which sat easy on him, but the tired of a difficult conversation. "Who's here?" she said. "Garland Fletcher," he said. She went still. Garland Fletcher was not a man you heard about in Durango without also hearing about land. He was 50 years old, ran a cattle operation 3 times the size of Samuel's, and had been quietly buying up property in the county for the past 4 years, whenever a ranch went under or a widow needed cash. He wasn't cruel about it. That was what made him effective. He waited. He offered fair prices. He smiled the whole time. He had been to see Abigail's ranch twice in the past year, once after her father died, and once after a bad spring when the well ran low. Both times she had said no. Both times he had smiled and said he understood, and she'd felt both times that the conversation wasn't over. "What does he want?" she said. "He wants my North 40, Samuel said. "The river access." The North 40 was the most valuable land Samuel owned. The creek that ran through it was the only reliable water source on that side of the valley. Whoever held it controlled access for 3 neighboring properties, including hers. "He knows it," she said. "He does." "What did you tell him?" "Told him I'd think about it." Samuel looked at her. "Abigail, if I sell him that parcel?" "My water rights change," she said. Flat, not a question. "Yes." She stood there for the moment, holding a pie she suddenly couldn't feel the weight of. "Did he say anything about my land?" "He asked how the Turner Ranch was doing," Samuel said carefully. "Asked it the way he asks things." Which meant it wasn't a question. It was a move. "He's been waiting for me to fail," she said. Not bitterly, just accurately. "I think he's been waiting for an opportunity," Samuel said. "Your land borders mine on the south. His land borders mine on the north. If he gets the North 40 and you sell, I'm not selling." "I know you're not." His voice was very even. "I'm telling you what he's building toward." The front door of the house opened, and Garland Fletcher came out onto the porch, and the first thing Abigail noticed was that he was smiling. The second thing she noticed was that he was the kind of man who smiled at everyone exactly the same way, which meant the smile contained no information. "Miss Turner," he said pleasantly, surprised in a way that was not surprise at all. "What a nice coincidence." "Mr. Fletcher," she said. "Beautiful morning for a visit." He looked at the pie in her hands with an expression of rehearsed delight. "You've been keeping Cole here well fed, I hear." "I bake when I have extra," she said. "That's neighborly." He came down the steps. He was a big man, not heavy, just large in the way that men are who have never doubted their right to take up space. "I was just discussing some business with Samuel. Nothing urgent." He looked between them easy and unhurried. "You know, Miss Turner, I've been meaning to follow up with you about that conversation we had in April, just to make sure you're doing all right out there on your own." "I'm doing fine," she said. "Of course you are. Independent woman." He said it the way Martha Holt said independent, like it was a diagnosis. "I just want you to know that if things ever get difficult, summer's been hard. I know it has, my offer stands. Generous terms. I'd make sure you were taken care of." Taken care of. Like she was a problem to be managed, rather than a person making choices. "I appreciate that," she said in the tone that closed a door. Fletcher looked at Samuel. Something passed between them, not hostile, just the acknowledgement of a negotiation that wasn't finished. "Think about the North 40, Sam. River access like that doesn't lose value, and the offer only gets more complicated if you wait." He picked up his hat from the rail. "Good day to you both." He went to his wagon. He drove away in no hurry, the way powerful men always left, like there was nowhere he needed to be, because everywhere he went became wherever he needed to be. Samuel and Abigail stood in the yard and watched him go. "He planned that," she said, "being here when I came." "Probably. He wanted to see how we'd stand." Samuel looked at her. "How did we stand?" She thought about it. "Like 2 people who know they're being maneuvered and don't intend to cooperate," she said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Close enough. She handed him the pie. "We need to talk about the North 40, she said. "Properly." "We do?" he said. They went inside and sat at Samuel's kitchen table. For the first time, she had never been inside past the kitchen doorway before, and Samuel put the pie on the counter and put coffee on, and they sat across from each other and talked about water rights and land value and Garland Fletcher's strategy. The way 2 people talk when they understand that what happens to one of them is going to affect the other, and there is no longer any point in pretending otherwise. It was the most honest conversation either of them had had in years. It was also, though neither of them acknowledged it the first time they had sat across a table from each other like 2 people who belonged in the same room. Abigail left 2 hours later with a clear head and a list of things she needed to check in her father's land records, and a feeling in her chest that she couldn't quite categorize something between determination and something softer. Something she was not ready to name while she was still in his kitchen. She named it on the walk home. She pressed it flat before she got to her door. The Harvest Social was 10 days out. Durango put considerable stock in the Harvest Social. It was the last large gathering before the weather turned, and as such, it carried the weight of all the things the town had been building toward. All summer, alliances confirmed. Courtships advanced. Judgments finalized. Who stood with whom at the Harvest Social said something in Durango's accounting about who you were and where you belonged. Abigail had gone every year, alone or with a neighbor's family, always on her own terms. She had never particularly cared what her attendants said about her. She cared this year, and she resented caring. 3 days before the social, she was at the general store when Barbara Crane cornered her between the dry goods and the thread. Barbara was not unkind exactly. She was the kind of person who convinced herself that causing pain was a form of honesty, which made her more dangerous than someone who just meant to be cruel. "Abigail," she said with the particular warmth of someone who has been looking forward to this conversation, "I've been meaning to speak to you." "Morning, Barbara. I want to say this as a friend." She lowered her voice in the way people do when they want to make sure the people nearby can still hear. "What you're doing with Samuel Cole, these visits, this business with the fence people, are saying things I don't think you want said. And with Ethan Marsh still interested, he is still interested, Abigail, despite how you spoke to him." "How I spoke to him was politely," Abigail said. "You turned him down on his own approach." "On my property," she said, "which is different." Barbara pressed on. "All I'm saying is that you have an opportunity with Ethan that you will not have with Samuel Cole. Samuel Cole is a kind man, but he is 55 years old, and he has had his life, and you—" Her eyes moved briefly down and up the quick assessment that Abigail had learned to feel before it even happened. "You need someone who can actually offer you a future." Abigail looked at her for a long moment. "Barbara," she said, "you've known me since I was 12 years old." "I have." "In that time, has there been a single occasion when telling me what I should do with my life produced any result other than me doing what I intended to do anyway?" Barbara opened her mouth. "I'm not being harsh," Abigail said. "I'm genuinely asking because if there has been such an occasion, I'd like to know about it because it hasn't come to my attention." Silence. "The thread I needed is behind you," Abigail said. "Could you move just slightly?" Barbara moved. Abigail got her thread. She paid for her goods, and she left the store, and she stood outside in the summer heat for 10 seconds, breathing evenly before she trusted herself to walk normally. She was angrier than she'd let on. Not at Barbara specifically. At the whole architecture of it, the system by which a woman's choices became everyone's concern, by which her body and her age and her relationships were public property, to be discussed and managed by people who had not been asked. She had lived inside that system her entire life, and she was at 25 profoundly tired of it in a way that had edges. She went home. She did not bake. She went into the barn and did the kind of heavy repetitive work that burned through anger-mucking stalls, moving feed, dragging a broken piece of equipment from one end of the barn to the other, for no good reason except that it needed moving, and she needed to move something. By the time the sun was setting, she was calm. By the time she sat on her porch in the cooling evening, she had made a decision. She was going to the Harvest Social. She was going to wear the blue dress she had made in May and never worn because it was the nicest thing she owned, and she had not been able to find an occasion she thought was worth it. She was going to wear her hair loose, or mostly loose, because she felt like it, and because someone had once said it was too informal for town, and she had believed them longer than she should have. She was going to go alone, and she was not going to spend a single moment of it being smaller than she was. The morning of the social, she baked. She went across the field at the regular time, and Samuel met her on the porch, looking like he hadn't slept particularly well, which was something she recognized because she hadn't slept well either. "You're going tonight," he said, not a question. "I am," she said. Ethan Marsh will be there. I imagine so. Fletcher will be there too, he said. He goes every year. He uses it to take people's temperature, figure out who's stretched thin, who might be ready to sell. I know, she said. He looked at her. Be careful. I know how to handle Fletcher. I know you do. He said it without hesitation, which was the kind of thing that caught her off guard, the sheer absence of doubt in it. He stopped. Something moved across his face. I don't like that you'll be there alone. The words hung there between them. She looked at him carefully. Samuel, she said. Are you saying you want to come? He was very still. I haven't been to the social since Eleanor died, he said. I know. People will talk. They're already talking. He looked out at the field for a long moment. She could see him doing the internal arithmetic, all the numbers, all the reasons, all the walls he had built out of those numbers since Eleanor died, and he decided that the best thing he could do with the rest of his life was be careful. Yes, he said finally. She blinked. Yes, what? Yes, I want to come. He looked back at her, and it was the most unguarded she had ever seen his face. If you want. Yes, she said, quickly, before she could think about it enough to hedge it. All right then. All right. They looked at each other for a moment, with the mutual, slightly stunned expression of two people who have just agreed to something that neither of them was sure they were ready for, and are not about to back down now. I'll come by at 7, he said. 7 is good, she said. She handed him the pie. He held it with both hands. She went back across the field faster than usual, and when she got inside, she pressed both palms flat on the kitchen counter and breathed. She was terrified. She was also under the terror, something else entirely. The harvest social was held in the large hall at the edge of town, the one with the high ceiling, and the long tables, and the lantern light that made everything look warmer than it was. By the time Samuel pulled his wagon up to Abigail's gate at 7, the sky had gone the deep orange of late summer evening, and Abigail was on her porch in the blue dress with her hair half down and her boots clean and her expression the one she wore when she had decided something completely. Samuel looked at her. He didn't say anything for a moment. You look... He stopped. Tried again. You look like yourself, he said. Like a version of yourself that stopped apologizing for something. It was possibly the most precisely right thing anyone had ever said to her. Let's go, she said, before her voice could do something she didn't want it to do. They arrived together. Samuel helped her down from the wagon with a hand that stayed a moment longer than strictly necessary, and they walked into the hall side by side, and the room did the thing rooms do. The sound adjusting the eyes, moving the particular recalibration of a social space that has just received information it wasn't expecting. Abigail felt every set of eyes. She kept her chin level. Samuel touched the small of her back for exactly 3 seconds, just enough to say, I'm here without making a declaration. And then he moved his hand away, and she understood in that 3 seconds more about who he was than she had in 3 years of Tuesdays. Ethan Marsh found her within 10 minutes. He was polite the way he always was when an audience was present. He asked how she was. She said fine. He asked if she'd dance later. She said she hadn't decided yet. He looked at Samuel. Samuel looked back at him with the particular expression of a man who has nothing to prove and knows it, which was significantly more intimidating than aggression would have been. Ethan moved on. Martha Holt watched the whole exchange from the dessert table with the expression of a woman whose careful architecture is developing an unexpected structural problem. It was Vera Hutchins, the newer woman, who delivered the blow. Abigail was standing near the side of the hall speaking with Mrs. Garza when Vera appeared at her elbow with the manufactured casualness of someone who has rehearsed their timing. Abigail, she said, sweet as bad fruit, how brave of you to come with him. I'm sorry, Abigail said. Samuel Cole. Vera smiled. I just mean at your age most women are still building their future. It takes real courage to invest your time in someone who won't be around to see it. The room around them didn't go silent. Life continued music conversation, the clink of glasses. But Mrs. Garza drew a breath, and Abigail felt the words land in the specific surgical place they had been aimed. She looked at Vera Hutchins, and something in her, something that had been patient for 25 years, something that had walked straight and kept its chin level and said nothing in dry goods stores and on porches and in 100 other places where the world had decided to measure her and find her insufficient. Something in her decided it was done being patient. "He won't be around to see it," she said slowly, making sure each word was clear. "You said that like a fact, like you've already decided how much time he has and what that means and what I should do about it." She looked at Vera steadily. "I've had people make those calculations about me my entire life. My weight, my age, my choices, my future. Everyone's had numbers for it. And I'm standing here in this dress, in this room, with a man who fixed my fence without being asked and sat at his kitchen table and helped me figure out how to protect my land, and who walked in here tonight knowing exactly what it would cost him in this town's opinion, and came anyway." Her voice was even. It was the evenness of something that has been holding pressure for a very long time and has finally found its shape. "So I'll let you keep your calculations, Vera. But I'm done living inside them." Vera said nothing. Mrs. Garza made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Abigail picked up her glass and moved back through the room. She found Samuel near the far wall, and when he saw her face, he straightened. Not alarm, just attention, the way he paid attention when something mattered. "Everything all right?" he said. "Getting there," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then he offered his hand. "Dance with me," he said. Not a question. Not a request exactly. More like something that had been decided a long time ago and was only now being spoken. She took his hand. They moved onto the floor, and the music was slow enough that it required standing close, and Samuel Cole put one hand at her waist with the certainty of a man who had made a decision and was not second-guessing it, and Abigail Turner let herself stand exactly as tall as she was, not an inch shorter, and they danced. Durango watched. Let it watch. She kept her chin level and her back straight, and her eyes forward and under her hand. She could feel that Samuel Cole's heart was beating considerably faster than his expression suggested, which meant he was as terrified as she was, which meant they were doing this together. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. They danced twice. The second time, he leaned close enough that she could hear him over the music, and he said low and certain, "I'm not counting years tonight." "Good," she said. "I might start counting them again tomorrow." "I know," she said. "We'll deal with tomorrow." His hand tightened once at her waist. Just once. The hall buzzed around them, and Martha Holt's expression had gone beyond architecture into something that looked almost like reassessment, which was the most progress anyone had made with Martha Holt in 30 years. Ethan Marsh had positioned himself across the room and was being talked to by his mother, which probably meant something for next week's conversations. Garland Fletcher stood near the door with his permanent smile and watched Samuel Cole dance with Abigail Turner, and something moved behind his eyes that was colder than anything in the room. That was the thing Abigail noticed over Samuel's shoulder in the last measure of the second dance. Fletcher wasn't watching them the way the rest of the town was watching them, with judgment or curiosity or disapproval or reluctant adjustment. He was watching them the way you watch two pieces on a board when your strategy depends on how they move. She filed that away. She kept her expression level. The music stopped. Samuel stepped back, still holding her hand for a moment, and she met his eyes, and both of them understood that something had crossed over tonight that couldn't cross back. Whether that was terrifying or extraordinary or both, neither of them said. They stayed at the social another hour. They ate. They spoke with the Garzas and a couple of other families who had the grace to be simply pleasant without making a performance of it. Samuel tipped his hat at people who deserved it and didn't bother with people who didn't. And when they left, walking out into the cooling night side by side, the door of the hall shut behind them, and the noise dropped away, and the dark came up, and it was just the two of them, and the wagon, and a summer sky full of stars, and all the things that had been said and not said tonight settling slowly into place. Samuel helped her up into the wagon. He drove her home without hurry, the way he did everything. At her gate, he stopped, and she got down, and he didn't drive away. Immediately, he stayed there while she walked to her porch, and she knew without looking that he was watching her, the whole way, the way he had watched her across the field that first Tuesday. Except that tonight, it meant something neither of them could continue pretending it didn't. She reached the porch and turned. "Samuel," she called across the dark. "Abigail. You should know," she said clearly, "that next Tuesday I'm bringing apple again, because it's your favorite and you never said so until you had to." A pause. Then, "That's an accurate statement." "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She went inside. He drove home. And somewhere in the space between her porch and his wagon in the cooling dark of that summer night in Colorado, the arithmetic that had governed everything between them started to break down at last, not all at once, not cleanly, but in the way that walls break when they've been asked to hold too much for too long. Not with a crash, with a quiet, irrevocable shift. And Garland Fletcher, driving home alone in his fine wagon with his matched bays and his careful smile, had already started adjusting his strategy. Fletcher moved fast. That was what Abigail didn't anticipate, not the move itself, because she had seen it coming across the room in the last measure of that second dance, had filed it away behind her composed expression, like a note pressed flat between pages. She had anticipated the move. She had not anticipated how fast, or how clean, or how thoroughly he had already laid the groundwork before that night was even over. 4 days after the harvest social, she found out from the county clerk. She had gone to the courthouse in Durango to pull her father's original land survey, the one that established the water access agreement between the Turner property and the Cole property, written in 1871 when both families had first settled the valley. She had been meaning to do it since the conversation in Samuel's kitchen, since Fletcher had sat across that negotiation and smiled at both of them like they were pieces on a board. She should have done it sooner. She knew that. She had been distracted by blue dresses and dances and a man's hand at the small of her back, and she would not make that mistake again. The clerk, a thin young man named Peters, who had the permanent apologetic look of someone who regularly delivers bad news, pulled the survey record and then pulled something else alongside it and set both on the counter and did not quite meet her eyes. "There's a filing here you should probably see," he said. She looked. Fletcher had submitted a formal petition to the county 3 weeks ago, before the social, before any of it, to reclassify the water access corridor along the north boundary of the Cole property as a commercial easement. If approved, it would not only change the terms of Samuel's land, but would legally subordinate the Turner property's secondary water rights to any commercial interest Fletcher established on that corridor. In plain terms, if Samuel sold him the North 40, and if the petition went through, Abigail's ranch would be dependent on Fletcher's goodwill for its water access every dry summer going forward. He hadn't asked. He hadn't negotiated. He had filed quietly with the county 30 days before the petition window closed, and sat at that social and smiled at both of them and said nothing. She stood at that counter for 10 seconds without moving. "When does the petition window close?" she said. 18 days, Peters said. "Can it be contested?" "Yes, ma'am. You'd need a formal objection filed by a directly affected property owner with supporting documentation of existing water rights." He paused. "And an attorney wouldn't hurt." Abigail looked at the petition again. Fletcher's handwriting was very neat. "Thank you," she said. She left the courthouse, walked to her wagon, and sat there for a moment with her hands on the reins, and the summer heat pressing down, thinking with the particular cold clarity that anger produces when it burns off all the noise and leaves just the shape of the problem. Fletcher had been patient. He had watched the Turner Ranch for 2 years, watching her manage alone, watching the dry springs, watching the numbers. He had made his offer twice, been refused. Twice, and instead of pushing, he had gone around. He had gone to the county. He had gone to Samuel. He had constructed a situation where the two people most likely to resist him were each facing a version of the same problem from different angles, and he had waited to see if one of them would flinch first. She drove to Samuel's ranch without going home first. He was in the barn when she pulled in, and he came out at the sound of her wagon, with the look of a man who reads faces well enough to know before anyone speaks that something has happened. "Show me," he said without preamble. She showed him. She spread the petition copy on the workbench in the barn and walked him through it point by point, and Samuel Cole, who was not a man who showed his reactions easily, went very still in the way that she had come to understand, meant he was more disturbed than any amount of visible anger would have indicated. "He filed this 3 weeks ago," Samuel said. "Before he came here to discuss the North 40, she said. "Before the social." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "He came here to take my temperature," he said slowly. "Not to negotiate. He already knew what he was going to do. He wanted to see if I'd sell voluntarily first, which would be easier, and if not, the petition goes through and the easement changes the value calculation on your land and mine both," she said. "It makes us both more dependent on what he controls." Samuel picked up the petition and read it again. His jaw was tight. 18 days, he said. "We need an attorney," she said. "And we need to pull every land record and water rights document going back to when our families first settled. My father's agreement with your family, the original survey, everything." "I have an attorney in Denver," Samuel said. "He handled Eleanor's estate. He's good." "Can you reach him fast? Faster than Fletcher expects." He was already moving toward the house. "Abigail." "I know," she said. "This got serious." "It was always serious," she said. "We just didn't know how serious until now." He looked at her across the workbench. "Are you all right?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not patronizing, not alarmed, just straightforward and real, the way Samuel asked everything. "Are you all right?" Like it was a thing worth knowing. Like her answer mattered to the problem, and to him in equal measure. "I'm angry," she said honestly. "But I think clearly when I'm angry. So yes." Something moved across his face. "Good," he said. "I need you thinking clearly." He sent a telegraph to Denver that afternoon. That night, alone in her house, Abigail pulled every paper her father had ever filed. Land surveys, water agreements, the original settlement documentation, a letter from the county commissioner dated 1872 that confirmed the Turner family's primary water access rights on the South Corridor. She spread them on her kitchen table and went through them one by one, and by midnight, she had a picture that was both worse and better than she'd thought. Worse, because Fletcher's petition had been constructed carefully. He had found a genuine ambiguity in the 1871 water corridor designation, a gap in the language that a good attorney could drive a wagon through. Better, because she found something else. A secondary agreement filed in 1874 by her father and Samuel's father together, that explicitly designated the water access corridor as a shared agricultural easement between the Turner and Cole properties. It was not a commercial easement. It was specifically, deliberately, an agricultural one, and the language was airtight enough that her father, who had not trusted vague language, had clearly had someone with legal training help him write it. She sat back in her chair and looked at that document for a long time. Then she got up and went to bed and slept better than she had in 2 weeks. She was back at Samuel's before breakfast. He was at his kitchen table when she knocked, which meant he hadn't slept either, and when she spread the 1874 agreement in front of him, he read it once, and then read it again, and then looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something between relief and something else, something warmer. "Your father and mine filed this together," he said. "In 1874. They knew the original survey had the gap. They closed it. Fletcher's attorney would have found the original gap," Samuel said. "Yes," she said. "He would have. I imagine he did. And then he probably stopped looking because the 1874 agreement is filed under a secondary index agricultural cooperative agreements, not under the primary water rights registry. You have to know to look for it." "But Fletcher doesn't know it exists." "I don't believe he does," she said. "Which means his petition is built on a foundation that doesn't hold." Samuel sat back in his chair. He put one hand flat on the 1874 agreement and looked at her across the table and said, "Your father was a careful man." "He was," she said. "I used to think it was just stubbornness. Turns out it was foresight." "Like his daughter," Samuel said. It was said quietly without performance, the way he said things that he meant most. She felt it the way you feel something that is true, not warm and soft, but solid, like ground underfoot. "Send this to your attorney in Denver," she said. "Along with everything else. We need the formal objection filed within 14 days to have margin." "I'll telegraph this morning," he said. "He should come here, in person." "Agreed." Samuel looked at her. "This is going to make Fletcher move." "I know. When he realizes we've found the 1874 agreement and filed the objection, he won't wait. He'll come at the North 40 harder, try to push me into a sale before the petition is ruled on. He'll figure a voluntary sale changes the legal landscape, even if the objection is sustained." "So we don't give him time," she said. "No," Samuel said. "We don't." They sat at the kitchen table until mid-morning, working through the documentation together, and Samuel's hired hand, a quiet man named Tomas, who had worked the ranch for 6 years, knocked at 9 o'clock and stopped in the doorway and looked at the papers spread everywhere, and the two of them sitting across from each other and said, "Should I come back?" in the tone of someone who already knows the answer. "Tomas." Samuel said, "Do you know if the north boundary markers are still clearly posted?" "Yes, sir. Put new ones up in spring." "Good. I need you to walk the whole north line today and document the creek access points. Everyone. Write it down." Thomas looked at the papers again. "Trouble. Precautionary," Samuel said. Tomas nodded and left. He had worked for Samuel Cole long enough to know that precautionary from Samuel Cole meant the opposite. Fletcher came 3 days later. He came in the morning, which was either confident or careless, arriving at a man's property in the morning when you know he'll be there, and working when there's no social occasion to soften the edges. He rode alone, which was also a kind of statement. Just a neighbor. Just a conversation. Samuel was at the corral. Abigail was not there. She had been there until an hour before, had ridden home to deal with her own morning work, and was not there when Fletcher arrived, which Fletcher may or may not have timed. "Sam," he said, easy as always, swinging down. "Garland?" Samuel didn't stop what he was doing. He was working with one of the younger horses running a lead line, and he kept his attention on the horse the way a man does when he wants to communicate that what's in front of him is more important than who's behind him. "Wanted to follow up on that conversation we had about the North 40, Fletcher said. "I think I may have left things too open-ended." "I told you I'd think about it," Samuel said. "You did, and I respect that. But I've had some new information come to my attention, and I want to make sure you have it too." Fletcher rested his arms on the top rail. "There's a petition in front of the county right now regarding the water corridor on your north boundary. I imagine you're aware of it." Samuel didn't react. "I'm aware of things that affect my property," he said. "Of course. Then you know that the corridor designation is under review, which means the value of the North 40 is in a period of some uncertainty." Fletcher's voice was still pleasant. It was always pleasant. "I'm prepared to offer you a price based on current assessed value before any uncertainty affects the market. That's a generous position for me to take." "Generous," Samuel said. "I think so." Samuel stopped working the lead line. He turned and looked at Fletcher with the direct look he used for things that mattered, and Fletcher, to his credit, did not step back. "Garland," Samuel said, "how long have you been planning this?" A pause. "I don't follow." "The petition. You filed it 30 days ago, before you came here the first time, before the social." He said it without heat, just the facts laid out clean. "You came here to see if I'd sell on my own first. When I didn't, you banked on the petition creating enough pressure to move me." He tilted his head slightly. "How'd I do?" Fletcher's smile held, but something behind it recalibrated. "That's a complicated reading of a business decision, Sam." "It's an accurate one." A beat of silence. Fletcher shifted his weight slightly. The petition is a legal filing. I have every right to make it. You do, Samuel said, and I have every right to contest it, which I've done. The smile went very still. You filed a formal objection, Fletcher said, 2 days ago, with supporting documentation. Samuel went back to the horse. My attorney came up from Denver. Interesting document, he found a cooperative easement agreement from 1874. Your attorney might want to look at it before you put more resources into this. Fletcher was quiet for 10 seconds. That was the longest Abigail had ever been told he went quiet about anything. The Turner girl helped you find it, he said. Miss Turner and I have an arrangement on water access that goes back to before either of us was born, Samuel said, which is what the 1874 agreement establishes. She's got no legal standing to... She's a directly affected property owner with a documented cooperative easement, Samuel said. That gives her exactly the standing she needs. He looked at Fletcher again. You built your strategy on a gap that was closed in 1874 Garland. You should have looked harder. The thing about Fletcher Abigail had observed was that he did not become visibly angry. He became very quiet and very still and very much like a man who is storing something for later. He was doing that now. This isn't over, Fletcher said. No. Samuel agreed. But it's not going the way you planned it. Fletcher left. No pleasantries this time. He mounted his horse and rode down the drive at the same unhurried pace he always used, because even in retreat, Garland Fletcher was not a man who showed you his feelings. Samuel watched him go. Then he went inside and telegraphed his attorney and told him Fletcher had been informed and to expect countermaneuvering within the week. What Fletcher did next was not what either of them expected. He went to Ethan Marsh, not to make an offer, not to conduct business. He went on a Sunday afternoon to the Marsh family home, and what happened in that parlor stayed in that parlor. But what came out of it arrived at Abigail's door the following Wednesday in the form of Ethan himself, looking uncomfortable in the way of a man who has been sent somewhere he didn't entirely choose to go. Abigail, he said at her gate, can I speak with you? She came out. She did not invite him in. I want you to know, he said, that I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here because I think you should know something. He turned his hat in his hands. Fletcher came to see my father. He's telling people in town that Cole is taking advantage of you. That the whole thing with the water rights and the land petition that Cole put you up to filing that objection to protect his own interests, and that you don't understand the legal situation. Abigail looked at him for a moment. He's saying I'm being used, she said. Yes. By a man who fixed my fence and let me sit at his kitchen table and go through my own father's land documents, she said. I know it's not. Does your father believe it, she said. Ethan was quiet for the moment. My father doesn't disbelieve things that are useful to him, he said with an honesty that surprised her. Fletcher wants the land deal and the petition, and he wants Cole isolated. Saying Cole is using you does all three. It turns the town against Cole. It turns you against Cole, and it makes the objection filing look like a manipulation rather than a legal defense. She looked at him. At this man who had shown up twice at her fence line with flowers from Denver, and the confident assumption that his future was the right kind of future. She had dismissed him as simple. She was revising that. You came to warn me, she said. I came because... He stopped. Honest again. Because I handled everything badly back in the spring, and because whatever I think about Cole, you deserve to know what's being said. Thank you, Ethan, she said, and she meant it. He nodded, put his hat back on. He's going to come at you next, he said. Fletcher, he'll come at you directly, probably with another offer but framed differently as a rescue maybe, letting you out of what he'll call an untenable situation. She filed that away. I appreciate it, she said. He rode away, and this time it felt different from every other time she'd watched Ethan Marsh leave, less like a door closing and more like two people who had finally found the right distance from each other, to be honest. She went inside and wrote a letter to Samuel. She didn't go across the field. She wrote it out and sent it with Tomas, who was at her place that afternoon, helping reset the east gate post, and the letter said three things: what Ethan had told her, what she thought Fletcher was going to do next, and what she thought they should do before he did it. Samuel's reply came back with Thomas 2 hours later. It said two things: he agreed and come to dinner. She stood in her kitchen holding that reply and looked at it for a moment that lasted considerably longer than the reading of it required. Come to dinner. Simple as that. The way you say it to someone who belongs at your table. She went. She brought nothing. No pie, no gift, just herself, which felt more vulnerable than any pie she had ever carried across that field. Samuel had made a simple meal, the kind of meal that a man makes who is a competent cook but doesn't perform at beans and cornbread, and a piece of beef that had been in a slow cook since morning, and coffee that was strong, the way she liked it, which she had never mentioned, but apparently he had noticed. She noticed that he had noticed. They sat across from each other at that kitchen table, with the land documents stacked at one end and their plates at the other, and the food was eaten and the plans were made with the practicality of two people who understand that the most important conversations happen over ordinary things. Fletcher was going to come to her. They agreed on that. He was going to come with an offer dressed as concern, and he was going to use the language of rescue because it was the most effective language to use with a woman the town already believed was being misled. He's going to say, "I'm taking advantage of you," Samuel said. He said it with the particular flatness of a man who finds the accusation both offensive and complicated. "I know," she said, "and there are people in this town who will believe it," he said, "because it fits a story they already want to tell." She looked at him across the table. "Samuel, do you think that—" He met her eyes. "No, I think you are the most clear-eyed person I have had a conversation with in 20 years. Then Fletcher's story doesn't have any power unless we give it some," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Something was moving across his face. Not the careful blankness he used in public, not the guarded deliberateness of their early Tuesday mornings. Something more open than that. Something that had been working its way toward the surface for weeks, and was finally tonight at the kitchen table, with the land document stacked at one end close enough to show. "I owe you something," he said. She waited. "I've been using the arithmetic," he said. "The years, 55 and 25, using it to keep a certain distance, to tell myself I was being sensible." He put his coffee cup down. "And I think some of that is genuine concern. For you. I meant it when I said I don't know if I have enough years." "Samuel, let me finish." He looked at her steadily. "But I think some of it has also been safer than saying what I actually—" He stopped again. His jaw pressed together in the way it did when the words weren't cooperating. "I am not good at this," he said. "I know," she said gently. "I don't want to be careful around you anymore," he said. "I've been careful for 3 years, and I think it has cost both of us something." The kitchen was very quiet. "What are you saying?" she said. "I'm saying that I would like—" He looked at her with the directness that she had learned was his most honest register. "I would like to stop treating this like something that requires conditions. I would like to stop waiting until I have a sufficient answer to the arithmetic, because I don't think the arithmetic has an answer that satisfies. And I think—" His voice dropped slightly. "I think I've been waiting long enough that I'm in danger of waiting past the point where any of it matters." She did not speak immediately. She let the words settle into their full shape. "I've been waiting too," she said finally. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry it took me this long." "You're not the only one who was afraid," she said. He looked at her. "I've been afraid since the first Tuesday," she said. "That this would be—" She stopped, steadied. "That you would always see me as the neighbor with the pie. That the joke you made that first day was the ceiling of it. That I'd spend the rest of my life crossing this field and never—" She stopped again. "Abigail," he said. "Yes. That was not the ceiling," he said. "It was never the ceiling." She breathed. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and she turned her hand palm up, and his fingers closed around it, and that was the entire thing. No performance, no declaration, just a hand on a table and the full weight of what 3 years of Tuesdays had actually been. "Now," she said after a moment, "what are we going to do about Fletcher?" He made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she had heard from him in 3 years. "Right now. The petition doesn't care that we're having a moment," she said. And he did laugh then, properly, the kind of laugh that takes a man by surprise and comes out before he can manage it, real and warm and unguarded. The laugh of a man who has been alone long enough that being surprised by laughter feels like something being returned. She felt it in her chest like a door opening. They talked for another 2 hours. The plan they built was simple, in the way that effective plans are simple, not because the situation was simple, but because the solution once found had the clean logic of something that had been there all along. Fletcher would come to her with his offer. She would let him make it. And then she would show him in plain language what the 1874 agreement meant, and what the formal objection meant, and what happened to a commercial easement petition when the directly affected property owners were not only contesting it, but doing so with airtight documentation, and an attorney from Denver who had been handling this kind of land case for 20 years. She would do it without anger and without drama, because neither was necessary when the facts were on your side. And then she would let him decide whether it was worth continuing. She rode home late, later than she had intended, with the stars out, and the summer air finally cool enough to breathe easily, and the feeling in her chest that had started at his kitchen table still warm and particular and real. She was not afraid of Fletcher. She was not afraid of Durango. She was still, in some ways, she was still working out, afraid of the size of what was beginning between her and Samuel Cole. Not because it was wrong, but because it was large, and large things demanded a courage. She was still assembling piece by piece. The arithmetic was real. The years were real. What came with love that arrived at 55 and 25 was real, and she did not intend to pretend otherwise. But she had learned something at a kitchen table with a man's hand over hers, and the land documents stacked at one end, that the arithmetic was not the story. It was just numbers. And she had never believed in numbers. Fletcher came to her 4 days later exactly as they had predicted, with his permanent smile, and his generous concern, and his offer framed as a rescue, the way Ethan said it would be. She let him finish. She poured him coffee, which he accepted. And then she put her father's 1874 agreement on the table in front of him, and said clearly, and without heat, "Mr. Fletcher, I want to show you something." She walked him through every document, every water rights record, every boundary marker, every point in the formal objection that his attorney had either missed or had chosen not to tell him about. She did it the way she did everything, practically precisely, with the specific competence of someone who had spent her life being underestimated and had learned to make that underestimation expensive for anyone who relied on it. Fletcher's smile held through the first document. It held through the second. By the third, it had become the expression of a man who has walked into a negotiation expecting to do the work and discovered the work has already been done without him. When she finished, there was a silence. "You've done your research," he said. "My father was a careful man," she said. "I learned from him." Another silence. "The petition may still go through," he said. "Not confident now. Testing. It may," she said. "But your attorney will tell you the probability has changed significantly since 2 weeks ago. And the legal costs of contesting a well-documented cooperative easement will run past what the North 40 would gain you in water access." She looked at him steadily. "I think you know that already." Fletcher looked at her for a long moment. She saw him in that moment the way she had seen him at the social, as a man who moved pieces on a board and had just watched 2 of those pieces move themselves into a configuration he hadn't planned for. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Most people find that," she said pleasantly. He left 30 minutes later, still smiling, because Garland Fletcher was not the kind of man who stopped smiling, but the smile had changed in quality. It was smaller now, more private, the smile of a man doing a recalculation. Abigail closed the door. She stood in her front room, with the documents spread on her table and the summer afternoon pressing at the windows, and she allowed herself, for exactly the length of one full breath, to feel the particular satisfaction of a problem solved with the tools her father had given her before she was born. Then she went to bake, not for obligation, not for ritual, but because it was Tuesday tomorrow and she was bringing apple, and she had decided 3 years ago, and one dance and one hand across a kitchen table, later, that Samuel Cole's kitchen table was somewhere she intended to keep returning to. Not as a neighbor, not as the woman with the pie, as someone who had made a decision. And Abigail Turner had never made a decision she didn't intend to keep. The county clerk's office posted the petition ruling on a Thursday morning 14 days after Abigail had walked out of that courthouse with Fletcher's filing in her hand and cold clarity in her chest. She heard about it before she saw it. Tomas came across the field, which he had started doing occasionally, the way people start doing things that reflect a new geography of belonging, and knocked at her door while she was still in the kitchen. And when she opened it, his face told her before his mouth did. "It was denied," he said. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "The petition," he said. "Fletcher's petition. Peters at the clerk's office posted the ruling an hour ago. Denied on grounds of conflicting prior easement designation." He paused. "The 1874 agreement, it held." Abigail put one hand flat on the doorframe. She had been prepared for either outcome. She had told herself carefully and repeatedly over the past 2 weeks to prepare for either outcome because the law was the law, and documents were documents, and even airtight cases had gaps that the wrong judge on the wrong morning could find. She had prepared herself. She was not. It turned out fully prepared for this one. "Thank you, Tomas," she said. "Mr. Cole sent me," he said. "He figured you'd want to know before the town started talking." "He was right," she said. "Tell him I'll come over this afternoon." Tomas nodded and left, and Abigail closed the door and stood in her kitchen with the morning light coming through the window and the smell of the coffee she'd made an hour ago still in the air. And she pressed both palms flat on the counter, the way she had the morning after the dance, the morning she'd let herself feel something she hadn't allowed in a long time. This was different from that morning. That morning, she had been managing hope. This morning, she was managing the fact that the ground she'd been fighting to stand on was still under her feet. She let herself have 60 seconds of it. The relief, the particular exhaustion of sustained tension, releasing the specific satisfaction of a fight, won with her father's handwriting, and 30 years of careful record-keeping, and a man in Denver who knew land law well enough to find the fulcrum. 60 seconds. Then she went to get ready because there was work to do, and she intended to do it. She was at Samuel's by early afternoon. He was on the porch, of course he was. He was always on the porch when she came, and she had long since stopped wondering whether he watched for her, and simply accepted it as one of the true things. And when she came up the steps, he was looking at her with an expression that was not quite a smile, and not quite relief, and was in fact something larger than either. "It held," she said. "It held," he said. She sat down in the other porch chair, the one she had been sitting in for months now without anyone having said it was hers, but which had become hers in the way things become yours when you keep returning to them, and they sat together in a silence that had the quality of two people exhaling at the same time. "Fletcher will regroup," Samuel said after a while. "He will," she said, "but not quickly, and not on this particular angle." She looked at him. "He's not going to stop being interested in this land, but he's lost the leverage he built the strategy around. He'll have to start over." "By the time he starts over," Samuel said, "I intend to have made things significantly more complicated for him." She raised an eyebrow. How? He leaned forward slightly. "I've been talking to my attorney about a formal land covenant between the Turner property and the Cole property. Not a sale, not a merger, a legal partnership covenant that ties the water rights and boundary agreements into a single recorded instrument. Something that makes the two properties legally interdependent in a way that any future purchaser of either would have to honor." He looked at her steadily. "It would make it considerably harder for anyone to pick us off separately." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's a significant legal commitment," she said. It is. Between two properties? Yes. That are owned by two people, she said carefully, who have not yet formally established what they are to each other. He met her eyes. I'm aware of that, he said. I'm proposing to solve one problem at a time. The legal one first because it has a deadline. The other one... He paused. The other one I'd like to handle properly. What does properly look like to you? She said. It looks like asking you, he said, without a lawsuit hanging over both our heads, without Fletcher's strategy determining our timing, without... He stopped, his jaw pressed together in the familiar way. I have done a significant number of things in my life because of external pressure. I do not want this to be one of them. She sat with that. So you want to do the covenant first, she said. And then ask me, separately, when neither of us can say we were pushed into it. Yes, he said. She looked at him across the space between their chairs. This man who had spent a summer being moved incrementally from the safe distance of a neighbor who received pies to someone who danced and fixed fences and sat at a kitchen table with his hand over hers and laughed with genuine surprise. And she understood in that moment something she had been working toward understanding for months. Samuel Cole's caution was not cowardice. It was the precision of a man who had loved someone for 26 years and knew what love actually cost and was not willing to offer it carelessly. He had been careless once with the joke on the porch, and she had corrected him, and he had never been careless since. She respected that more than she had words for. All right, she said. The covenant first. He nodded once the way he confirmed things that mattered. I'll have the attorney draw it up, he said. Good. They sat in the afternoon quiet. Hector breathed. The summer pressed down as it always had, as it would until September finally broke it. Samuel, she said. Abigail. Just so you know, she said, I already know what I'm going to say. When you ask, properly, on your timeline. She looked at him level. I just want you to know that, so the arithmetic doesn't convince you again before you get there. He was very still for a moment. Something moved across his face that was open and unguarded, and she thought as close to undone as Samuel Cole ever allowed himself to be in daylight. Noted, he said quietly. Good, she said. She stayed until the evening. The town ruling took 3 more days to fully circulate through Durango, the way information moved in a town that size, not all at once, but in waves, each wave adding texture. By Sunday, the general outline was understood. Fletcher's petition had failed. The Cole and Turner properties had filed a joint legal objection and won, and the two of them had apparently done it together with documentation going back to before most current residents had arrived in the county. The reaction was not uniform. Martha Holt said nothing publicly, which from Martha Holt was the closest thing to acknowledgement that she had been operating on incorrect assumptions. She did not apologize. She did not revise her general worldview. But she stopped saying Abigail Turner's name in the dry goods store with that particular inflection, and for Durango that counted. Vera Hutchins left town in October to visit family in New Mexico and did not come back, which no one connected to any particular event, but which coincided neatly with a social landscape that had reorganized itself sufficiently that her role in it no longer existed. The Garzas came by Abigail's ranch the following Monday with a basket of late-season fruit, and Mrs. Garza hugged her in the yard and said in the direct way of a woman who had watched Abigail walk straight under this town's commentary for years. Good, it's about time. Abigail accepted the fruit and the hug and said thank you and did not cry, which required some effort. Ethan Marsh came by once more. He did not come to her gate. This time he caught her in town outside the general store, and he stopped and looked at her with the uncomplicated honesty that had surprised her during his warning visit. I heard the petition was denied, he said. It was, she said. Good, he said simply. Then, I also heard my father had a long conversation with Fletcher last week that did not end well for either of them, which I take as a reasonable outcome. He paused. I want you to know I didn't know about the petition when Fletcher came to us. I found out the same time you did. I believe you, she said. He nodded. He put his hat back on. "He's a good man," he said. "Cole, I didn't want to see it before, but he is." She looked at Ethan Marsh for a moment, at this man who had arrived in her life as an obstacle, and was leaving it as something closer to a witness, and she felt for the first time genuinely warmly toward him. "Thank you, Ethan," she said. He nodded again and walked on, and that was the last real conversation they had, and it was the right note to end on. The attorney came back from Denver the following week to finalize the covenant. He was a compact, precise man named Aldrich, who wore his suit like it was armor, and asked questions like he was loading a rifle, one careful round at a time. He sat at Samuel's kitchen table with Abigail across from him and Samuel beside her, and he went through the covenant document clause by clause, and he did not comment on the arrangement of the people in the room, except to address both of them as principals, throughout which was the right professional call, and which Abigail appreciated. When he reached the final clause, the one that established the covenant as binding on any future title holders of either property, requiring both parties' consent for any modification, he looked up at both of them over his reading spectacles. "This is a significant long-term commitment," he said. "Both of you need to be certain." "We're certain," Abigail said. Samuel didn't add anything to that because she had said it completely. Aldrich looked at them both for a moment longer than was strictly necessary for a legal review. Then he said, "All right then," and moved to the signature page. They signed. Samuel first, then Abigail, then Aldrich as witness. And when the document was folded and secured, and Aldrich had put it in his case to be registered with the county, he shook both their hands and left without ceremony, because he was a man who understood that some moments required the professionals to simply finish their work and get out of the way. Samuel walked him to the wagon. When he came back inside, Abigail was standing at the kitchen table with her hand still resting on the surface where the document had been. "It's done," she said. "It is," he said. He came across the kitchen and stopped in front of her, and the kitchen was quiet, and the afternoon was going gold outside the window, and Hector was audible from the porch making the specific sound he made when he was dreaming about something. "Abigail," Samuel said. She looked up at him. "I told you I wanted to do this properly," he said. "On our own timeline, without the legal situation setting the terms." "You did," she said. "The legal situation is resolved," he said. "It is," she said. He was standing closer than the kitchen table required. Closer than two neighbors stood in the way that had become true between them gradually, and was now simply the distance they occupied when they were speaking about things that mattered. "I am 55 years old," he said. "I know," she said. "And I am standing here asking you not as a joke, not as an arithmetic problem, not as a warning, asking you properly." He looked at her with the full directness of a man who has spent his whole life communicating in plain language and is using every bit of it right now. "Whether you would be willing to let this become what I think we both know it already is." She had told him she already knew her answer. She had said it on the porch clearly so the arithmetic wouldn't erode him before he got here. And yet, standing in his kitchen with the covenant filed, and the summer finally going toward its end, and 3 years of Tuesdays compressed into the space between one breath and the next, she found that the answer felt entirely new. Like saying it for the first time, even though she had known it since somewhere around the 3rd or 4th Tuesday, maybe earlier, maybe the very first one. "Yes," she said. "Samuel, yes." He put his hands on either side of her face, careful, deliberate the way he did everything. And he looked at her for a moment that lasted long enough to be a full acknowledgement of everything that had been traveled to get here. Then he kissed her. Gently, the way you do something you have been waiting a long time to do, carefully, the way you treat the first moment of a thing you intend to last. When he stepped back, Hector had apparently woken from his dream and was audible from the porch, making an entirely different and wholly inappropriate sound. And both of them looked toward the door and then back at each other, and the laugh that came out of Abigail Turner was entirely undignified and completely real. "That dog," she said. "He has no sense of occasion," Samuel said. But his face was a thing she had never seen before, open and warm and wholly unguarded, and younger than 55, in the way that a man goes younger when something he had stopped expecting is suddenly improbably real. She thought, I am going to remember this face for the rest of my life. She thought, I intend to see it for the rest of my life. She didn't say either of those things. She didn't need to. They were both already true. Daniel Cole came back in September on purpose this time, with a proper letter sent 2 weeks in advance that arrived before he did. He came with his carpetbag and his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness and considerably more questions than he had the last time. And this time, he was honest about the questions instead of packaging them as concern. He arrived on a Saturday, and Abigail was at the ranch when he came. Not as a coincidence, this time, not as an ambush of context, but simply because she was there, in the way that she was regularly there. And Samuel had told him she would be, which was a different kind of statement than any conversation they could have had. Daniel shook her hand on the porch with the careful formality of a man who has been raised right and is making an effort. "Miss Turner," he said. "Daniel," she said. "You can call me Abigail. We've met before." "I know," he said. "I didn't acquit myself particularly well the last time." "No," she agreed pleasantly. "But you sent your father a letter 2 weeks ahead this time which suggests you're learning." Something shifted in Daniel's face. Not quite a smile, too much of his father in him for it to come easily, but the beginning of one. "Pa said you were direct," he said. "Your father appreciates direct," she said. "I imagine you do too, somewhere under the Denver politeness." And there was the smile. Small, real, taking him by surprise exactly the way his father's laugh had taken Samuel by surprise in the kitchen. They ate dinner together, the three of them, and it was not easy in the seamless way of families who have been together long enough to find their rhythm. But it was honest, and honest was more valuable. Daniel asked questions, real ones, not the ones shaped like concern, but the ones shaped like a son, trying to understand something that had changed the landscape of his father's life. Abigail answered them straight. Samuel watched his son recalibrate in real time and said very little because he didn't need to. After dinner, while Abigail was washing dishes, she had insisted because it was his house, and she had eaten his food, and there was no argument to be made against it. Daniel sat with his father on the porch. She could hear them through the kitchen window without meaning to. "She's not what I expected," Daniel said. The same thing Fletcher had said, which made her think that she was consistently not what people expected, which she had long since decided was more compliment than complaint. "No," Samuel said. "She isn't. She's—" Daniel paused. "She's good for you. I can see it. You're—" Another pause, and his voice went quieter, and she understood this was the real conversation, the one under the one they'd been having all evening. "You're back, Pa. You've been since Ma died. You've been going through the motions. I've been watching it for 3 years and I didn't know how to say it. And now you're back." Silence. "Yes," Samuel said simply. "I gave you a hard time last summer," Daniel said. "About the arithmetic, the years." "You did." "I was wrong," Daniel said. "Not about the math. The math is real and I think you both know it better than I do. But about what it meant, about whether it was a reason." "It isn't," Samuel said. "It's a fact. Facts don't make decisions. People do." Another silence. Longer. "I like her," Daniel said finally in the tone of someone who is both surprised and decided about it. "Good," Samuel said. "She'll like knowing that. She'll never say so, but she will." Abigail stood very still at the kitchen sink with her hands in the wash water and let those words land exactly where they were aimed. Then she finished the dishes. The summer broke in late September, the way it always did, not gradually but decisively, as if the heat had simply decided it was done and walked away without looking back. The mornings went cool overnight. The grass along the creek changed color. Abigail's boots went back to the heavier pair. The Tuesdays continued. They were different now, and also exactly the same, which was the particular gift of something that had been true for a long time, finally being spoken aloud. The form remained while the weight of it shifted, settled, became something you could live inside rather than something you were only allowed to look at from the outside. She still baked. He still took the pie with both hands. But now she stayed for dinner sometimes, and sometimes he rode over to her ranch in the early evenings and helped with the fence work that she had more of than two hands could manage. And sometimes they sat on his porch in the cooling evenings and talked or didn't talk with equal comfort, which was the truest measure of two people having found their right distance. Durango settled into its new understanding of things the way towns do, not gracefully, and not all at once, but with the grudging practicality of a community that has realized the world has rearranged itself without asking permission. Martha Holt, true to form, found a new subject for her window table commentary within a month and transferred her energy there with the efficiency of a woman who cannot be idle. Barbara Crane's seamstress shop got Abigail's business that winter because Abigail needed a new dress, and Barbara Crane was the best seamstress in town, and Abigail was not going to let old discomfort cost her good craftsmanship. Barbara was careful and professional, and the dress was excellent, and that was that. The Garzas came to dinner at Samuel's in October, and it was the easiest evening any of them had spent all year, which told Abigail something important about which relationships were worth keeping, and which ones had only ever been maintained out of proximity and habit. Fletcher filed no further petitions. His attorney Abigail heard through the county clerk had sent a letter of advice recommending against further action on the water corridor, citing the strength of the 1874 agreement and the legal costs of contesting a well-documented joint covenant. Fletcher took the advice. He was a businessman, not a vindictive man, and bad investments were bad investments. He bought 3 parcels on the other side of the county by November and turned his attention there. The chessboard had been reconfigured. He played on a different board. Abigail filed the covenant in the county records herself in person on a Wednesday morning. Peters, the apologetic young clerk, processed it without comment, but when he handed her the registered copy, he said quietly, and without looking up from his desk, "That's a well-written document, Miss Turner. My father wrote the foundation of it 30 years ago," she said. "I just followed his instructions." Peters looked up then. "He'd have been glad to know it held," he said. She stood at that counter for a moment, with the registered copy in her hands, and thought about her father, about his bad singing in the early mornings, and his careful handwriting, and his instinct to document every agreement twice, and his belief, which he had never stated in so many words, but which had been present in everything he did, that a woman who understood her own land and her own rights was a woman nobody could take from. "Yes," she said. He would have. She went home. She baked. It was not a Tuesday, but she baked anyway because she felt like it, and because the kitchen was hers, and the pie would be good, and the man across the field would eat it with both hands and say something honest about it, and that was reason enough. The day Samuel Cole formally asked her to marry him was a Tuesday in November because, of course, it was. There was no performance to it. No flowers from Denver. No rehearsed speech. No moment staged for an audience. He was on the porch when she came, and he stood when she came up the steps, which was slightly different from the usual, and he had no particular expression on his face, just the open, direct look that she had come to understand was his most honest register. She put the pie on the rail. "Abigail," he said. "Samuel," she said. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want to say first that I have thought about it long enough that I am no longer willing to call it uncertain." She was very still. "I know what the years look like," he said. "I know I am 55 and you are 25, and that when you are 50, I will be 80 if I am anything at all. I know this town has had opinions about that, and I know you have never particularly cared about this town's opinions, and I know I am only now arriving at the same place you have been standing for months." He looked at her steadily. "I know all of that, and I am asking you anyway, because I have been a careful man my whole life, and I believe careful is right in most situations, but I also believe that there are situations where continuing to be careful is just another word for afraid. And I am done being afraid of this." She was not going to cry. She had decided some time ago that she was not going to be a woman who cried at the important moments, and she held to that with everything she had. Her eyes were very bright. "Abigail Turner," he said. "Will you marry me?" Not a question quite, a statement that wanted confirmation, which was exactly who he was. "Yes," she said, for the second time. Still new, still entirely true. Samuel Cole, yes. He reached out and took her hand. Not the way he had across the kitchen table, palm covering palm, but differently, fingers intertwined, the way you hold something you intend to keep. They stood on the porch with Hector breathing on the floorboards and the November air going cold around them and the field between their properties golden and quiet. And neither of them said anything for a while because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said over the course of 3 years and 6 seasons of Tuesdays, and 1 dance, and 1 covenant, and 1 kitchen table, and all the hundreds of small true things that had accumulated between them, without fanfare or permission. Thomas found out by Friday, which meant he had been watching more carefully than anyone had credited him for. He said congratulations to Samuel in the barn, and did not make a production of it, which was exactly the right response. Mrs. Garza found out on Saturday, and made a sound of such complete satisfaction that her husband came in from the yard to see what had happened. Martha Holt found out on Monday and said nothing, which by this point had become her established response to information about Abigail Turner that didn't align with her calculations. Daniel wrote a letter from Denver that arrived 2 weeks later. It was short. He was his father's son, and it said, "I told Pa last September that I liked her. I want you both to know I meant it. Congratulations. I'll come for Christmas if you'll have me." Abigail wrote back herself. She told him they would have him and that she was a better cook than his father, which was true, and that Hector had developed a new and entirely undignified habit of sleeping in the kitchen on cold nights, which Daniel should know going in. He wrote back in 4 days, which for Daniel Cole was practically by return mail. They were married in December at the small church on the east side of Durango on a Thursday morning with snow on the ground, and the Garzas and Tomas and Daniel and Peters the clerk, who had been invited because Abigail felt that a man who quietly told you your document was good deserved to see what came of it. Martha Holt was not invited. She was also, not to her credit, visibly offended, which suggested she had arrived at an understanding of her own account in this particular story, and had chosen not to test it further. The ceremony was short because Samuel had requested short, and Abigail had agreed, and the minister who had known Samuel since Eleanor's funeral, and was therefore acquainted with his relationship to ceremony, kept his part to the necessary words, and let them have the rest for themselves. When it was done, Samuel put his hand at the small of her back. 3 seconds the way he had at the social. Except this time, it did not end at 3 seconds, and they walked out into the December cold side by side, and Abigail Turner looked at the sky above Durango, Colorado, white and wide, and indifferent to everything that had happened under it, and she felt something she had been carrying for 25 years, finally completely put down. Not because she needed him to be whole. She had been whole. She had run a ranch alone and fought a land petition, and walked straight under this town's commentary for years, and she had been whole through all of it. But there is a difference between being whole and being known. Between standing on your own ground and standing on it with someone who chose to stand there with you deliberately, with full knowledge of what it cost. Samuel Cole had stood on her ground. She had stood on his. They had built a covenant before they built anything else because both of them understood that what you protect first is what you believe matters most. Years later, when people in Durango told the story, and they did tell it because it was the kind of story towns carry forward, worn smooth by retelling, until it becomes the version the town needs it to be. They said it was a love story, which it was. They said it was unlikely, which it was also. What they rarely said because it required a precision most storytelling doesn't stop for, was that it was also a story about 2 people who refused to let other people's arithmetic determine what was possible. About a woman who baked a pie every week, not because she was waiting to be chosen, but because she had already made her choice and was simply giving it time to become undeniable. About a man who counted years until a 25-year-old woman told him plainly on his own porch that the wanting was already there, and he was the one keeping the door closed. About what happens when 2 people stop being afraid of the same thing at the same time. about a door that was never as closed as it looked. Abigail Turner had known that from the beginning. She had carried a pie across a field every Tuesday for 3 years, and she had walked straight, and she had kept her chin level, and she had waited not passively, not diminished, but with the particular patience of a woman who understands that the right things are worth arriving at carefully. And they had arrived. That was not luck. That was not accident. That was not the arithmetic of age or body, or social approval or anything else. This town or any other town had ever tried to use to calculate her worth. That was two people choosing each other clearly on their own terms in their own time. And that in Durango, Colorado, in the summer that became a winter that became a life, was enough. It was in fact everything.